Welcome back to just another little segment on Walter's life. And while he was here at the Ukrainian Baptist Church, while he started playing with the group, in one of the newsletters I read, and I know that impacted him quite a bit and benefited all of us, said, "School time now." This is in the October '73 issue of UBHC. At that time, Pedro Mazaleka was the president, Walter Kohut was vice president, Stu Ostapchuk was secretary, Walter Revka was treasurer. A lot of the parents, actually, Mr. Revko and Mr. Ostapchuk, both were original members in 1950, and how their children served on in the youth committee and roles. Member is Mary Stribyak, another original member from 1952. Roxanne Ivashchev, I had a chance to interview her father, his many years of service to our people. Danny Slobodyan, his father was used at a cell. Danny Dumich, who, when I was doing the 50th anniversary in Toronto, found out when I was calling his mom to invite her that he just died the month earlier. At such a young age, an incredible historian of Niagara Falls, which I didn't even realize the books that he wrote, became the expert on Niagara Falls history. One of our pastor's sons. And when I read in the life's tribute for Reverend Dumich, I remember reading his daughter talking about how without fail, they walked across the bridge of Niagara Falls every single time to the church. Wintertime.
From the United States.
From Niagara Falls to the Canadian side. Wintertime, snow, rain, and I'm forgetting her name right now. Ellen. And this was from the funeral program, and I remember her saying that we went to the funeral with my father, how he carried her on his shoulders, and how he sang all the way. And we know how Mr. Dumich loved to sing, and how he used the group to reach out to the Ukrainian community. I think his favorite song, Walter, "There Will Be Showers of Blessing." He sang that all the time. I'm joined at the piano again as we listen to some incredible songs that we were blessed with sitting in this church, especially me growing up. And this song I'm going to dedicate to Mrs. Dumich. I know when the Living Hope Singers sang wherever we went, her husband wanted to reach the Ukrainian people. And in all the churches in Niagara Falls, St. Catharines, whenever we had the services, I remember Brother Dumich always leading the people in showers of blessing. And I don't think I'm mistaken in that, but that was his favorite song. Even when he came to Toronto, the Eastern conferences, we always sang showers of blessing, Den Bloslovenia. And I'm going to ask Oksana to play this song in dedication to Mrs. Dumich as you're sitting at home. Imagining being the daughter of Reverend Dumich on the shoulders, coming to the Niagara Falls Church, and how the special times we had of getting away from Toronto and always looking forward to go to Niagara Falls. Why? It wasn't just the food and sitting in that small church, I think on Ferguson Avenue Street. Yeah. But you know what we did after that morning service? What did we do? We all walked down the falls, down the street, and we walked the length of that falls, not as far as to get that mist on us, but how many of us missed that afternoon service? So you'll be able to access this on a website that I will be creating in honor of my father, who for 50 years kept almost everything he ever got from the Ukrainian Baptist Church. Just yesterday, I was able to go through all the songbooks that he collected from Germany and this church, and all the songbooks from Brother Bichkowski, Brother Rich when he compiled them, Brother David Yuk. Every single songbook he collected, he used these songbooks when he was ministering in Germany. But he kept all of our magazines, and a lot of these interviews, I'm drawing information from being able to review his magazines that he's kept so preciously for 50 years. Here's one of the ones that I inherited from Dan and Nell at Siona. This is part of my own private collection when I started right through 1979. Dan and Nell blessed me by giving me everything they had with all the newsletters they received. And that was a real treat. Dan and Nell, you know, all your stuff is in treasured hands, and it's been like that for over 30 years. One paragraph, it says, school time now, and who should become a pencil pusher but our past president, Walter Kohut. He is now enrolled in Bible school, and we hear that it is pretty hard. We're all praying for you, Walter. And right below that, Walter Kohut's brother Roman and his wife now live in Ontario. A big welcome to them. Walter, this little section here, how did God call you? Where did you go? And what did you benefit from school? I know I sat under your speaking in 7 or 8 years of being with a group every Sunday, not just as MC, but many times you introduced songs. Scripture memory rolled off your tongue without effort, but I know that was hard work on your part to memorize that. And how many times are in English churches, the humorous messages? We know, as Dr. Bridge spoke in Ukrainian, he was an academic, he was deep. We know that you didn't have that privilege of schooling and background, and so your messages were very short, they were humorous, they were three-pointers, and you always had that little New Testament. And I finally figured when I got speaking, how did you remember all that stuff? Well, you had your notes in that Bible. And how could you, when you ever heard Walter speak, it came out of him without notes, but I know he had his 3 points there, just in case he ever got off topic, but he never did. He got his points down, and we've always heard that. Walter, share your past, you're president here, you're in Toronto about 5 years, you're married now, you're working, you didn't touch upon that, Canada Sheet Metal at that time.
Canada Metal Company.
Canada Metal. I know what happened to me in December 1985. God moved upon me when I was teaching our youth. This is just after you left, the end of that first year. And I got on a plane and flew to Winnipeg, checked out the school, and I said, this is where God wants me to be. My sister helped me getting a flight, and within 2 weeks, I packed up my whole life, got in a van, and drove to Winnipeg, and started there in January 1986. I didn't get a chance to say this because I haven't spoken much for the last few hours as we're sitting here. But what people need to know is the blessing you've been in my life, but the blessing that started with your father. He starts the church in Rosa River, and we have the history here, and this will just take a quick minute that people need to see. We have the history of the narrow road, Walter's father's story. Then we have Brother John, Walter's uncle, who I interviewed, started the church 1953 to 2003. And in here, when you flip through here, there's a lot of pictures, the 25th anniversary. There's the Kohut boys, June 14th, 1964, 2 banjos and a violin. And we have the 3 sons in 1973, I believe after the funeral. A lot of pictures on your parents. And then in here are pictures of
I think you're in there too, Peter.
Student pastors who shared. And I just wanted to take this time of how I believe both of us, God came into our lives and called us to further study. And what happened to me is, as I just shared, I go out to Winnipeg, and the second semester I get out there in September 1986, I come to Rosa River Baptist Church, and Brother John Tymciw, they have the fellowship room in the back. And after every church service that I was there, they always had a potluck dinner. Everyone brought food. And Brother John, who is in these pictures here in Aura, he turns to me and said, we would like to extend an invite for you to be our student pastor. And I served there for 3 semesters. Never since then have I been able to preach regularly every Sunday. God has had different plans for me in my last 24 years. But I preached through 1 Thessalonians, I preached through Philippians, and I believe Colossians. And Walter needs to hear this. The first time, I know a lot of people have walked out on my preaching when I preached here in English. A lot of our men have walked out because it wasn't in Ukrainian. But when I preached in English, I couldn't understand why someone would walk out of my message when it's in English. And at Rosa River Baptist Church, Walter's music teacher, Pauline Nedahin, who I didn't know at that time how she was impacted Walter's life, walked out in the middle of my message, only to find out that the bathrooms were outside. And you had to leave to go outside. It was a winter time. And Bert and Pauline and Eileen Kohut, your sister, and John and Angie and Lil were actually sitting in pews listening to me. Little old me, small little boy coming from Germany to Canada, to these pews in 1962, and banging my head. I was so small, when I fell asleep, I remember hitting the pews, and everyone heard me at that time, and that woke me up. I remember falling across the pew and falling asleep on my mother's lap when I was just a little boy. I couldn't believe how God would take a little boy like me from these pews all the way to Rosa River. And I'm sharing that story as just part of, for Walter's encouragement, that what his father started and blessed in his life came to Toronto through these doors when he met Walter Tymciw. And years later, God took me, of all the schools, to Winnipeg and took me to Rosa River Baptist Church. I did not ask for that or orchestrate that. And when I got there, took me into that church and made me their student pastor. And the whole wheel of blessing came back around over 20 years, and that has been an incredible blessing in my life. So I have a little history in the Rosa River Baptist Church, and I remember those days fondly. And I hope with my remaining years that I can somehow be restored to a position where I'm allowed to preach without restraint, preach without being criticized in the Ukrainian language, preach without being criticized for anything, but I had a chance this past weekend at a solo to preach on the Holy Spirit. And I believe I still have a vision that this church someday, whatever language, that we would see this church jam-packed as it was years ago, reaching the people in this area here. Walter, sorry, I needed to share that.
That was good. That was very good.
That you would hear that. It's 1983, God, 73, and 85 years later, something happens in my life, and I can understand exactly what you went through. How did all that happen? What made you go to Bible college? How did God call you, and how many years did you spend there, and what do you remember from those days?
My dad passed away February 23rd of 1973. I was with the group already 3 years, and as I believe I mentioned earlier, many places where we sang, they would want someone to bring a message, maybe preach. And I thought to be better prepared, I should go to a Bible school or a Bible institute or a seminary. And I checked out a couple, one in Peterborough, which is the Pentecostal one, Eastern Pentecostal college there. And I didn't feel that I didn't feel led to go to that one. And I wasn't sure where the Lord would want me to study. One day I was driving up Jarvis Street from Farmers Market, St. Lawrence Market, and as I was driving by, I noticed. I told the story in my testimony at the seminary of how I came to the seminary. The people are waiting for me to say, I noticed Toronto Baptist Seminary right next to the Jarvis Street Baptist Church. And I said, no, I noticed Harvey's Hamburgers across the street from there. That's the first thing I noticed. And as I noticed that, I glanced over, and there's Toronto Baptist Seminary. I quickly ran, when I got home, I opened the dictionary to look up the word seminary to see if there's a place for me there. And then I sent in an application. I was accepted there for a 2-year Bible course. I was not, I didn't feel led that I'm called. At that time, that first year, I thought maybe this may go on, I might be a pastor. But I felt led to take their 2-year Bible course. I was employed full-time, and I walked into the office, and I tell them in the office, I say, I will be quitting. And one of the supervisors says, why? I says, I'm going back to school. It's a Bible school. A higher-up manager came to me when I was working on the machine at the Canada Metal Company, and he says to me, I hear that you are leaving us. And I says, yes, just definitely yes. He says, why? I says, I'm going to Bible school. And he says, you don't have to leave. And I was taken aback, because all the years that I worked for this company, there was no such thing as a part-time worker there. This is a union shop, and you're either full-time there, or you're an apprentice, or there's no such position. They opened up a position for me to work part-time. There were no classes on Mondays, and there were half-day classes on Fridays. So you can work on Monday at this place, and likewise come in on Friday in the afternoon for an afternoon shift. And plus, once a month, we will put you on the inventory team, where we take inventory once a month. So you will be on that. So, and I kept my seniority while I did the 2 years at the Toronto Baptist Seminary. I felt this is where the Lord would have me be. I says, I'm going to do, I said to myself, I'm going to do the best I can. I have been out of school for some 10 years, and the courses were there, were seminary courses. The same people who are going for their doctorate, their Bachelor of Theology, Bachelor of Religious Education, and Master of Divinity, all this, they are taking these same courses the first 2 years, plus adding Greek and Hebrew. I didn't do that. And they are sitting in the same class, but I'm only going this far. I feel glad that this is what I can handle right now. And anyways, I did the best I could when it came to graduating time. I won an award for proficiency in New Testament. I was the valedictorian. I should pat myself on the back for that one. And I walked up to the platform with the graduating class. Walked up to the platform, I believe it was 3 or 4 times, up to the stage. And 2 times was by myself for the award, and then the valedictorian. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, my dad passed away. I wish he would see me. This was in May of '75. And it says, it would be nice if my mother was here. I didn't know all that time in that filled up church, Jarvis Street Baptist Church, that my mother was sitting at the back. She saw it all, and didn't notice until after the students, when the service, the graduation exercises were over, we're standing up front. Oh, let's take a picture. Let's take a picture. So students, up front, and all of a sudden I see near the back, that's my mother standing there, and she's waving to me. I was so excited, and I accomplished what I felt that the Lord would have me do.
Was that a surprise that your mother came down? Or you
that my brother was living in Ontario, so she came to his place up north and only south, and he brought her here. Mary Sherbiak with her husband Harley. These were Ontario Bible College students. Tyndale, where you graduated from, that was called Ontario Bible College, and they were there. Henry and Lily, Danny, and Nell, Siona, Walter Ostapchuk. The first man I met in this, he was a supporter of the youth, and he was there to cheer me on. And there were several others. The Machniks, Stefan Machnik and his wife, Lottie.
They went to Jarvis.
So they were regular there as well. I'm not sure if John Prokopiak and his wife Mary were at the graduation, but there were supporters from the Ukrainian Baptist Church were over there. So I used what I learned there. Every so often, when the group wasn't traveling, I would still teach the youth Sunday school class. But when it came to preparing messages, sermons, sermonettes, whatever you want to call it, sermonettes or for Christianettes. But anyways, I would use what I learned in the seminary there. I like to call it seminary. Today it's Jarvis Street Baptist Seminary and College, I believe is the title for that. But back then it was called the seminary. And to be the valedictorian, that means the Lord blessed you with the highest mark in the class. I think it was 5 of us who graduated that year. And I'm so thankful for that. Use that in the group, and we were supposed to go on from that to going to Dovercourt.
How did God call you there? How did you sense going to Bible college? That's sharing the whole story there, and I think you missed. How did that happen?
How did that happen? Well, my dad passed away in that year of '73 in February, and I felt glad. Actually, my dad gave me all his manuscripts, put my story together.
I remember you're finishing it.
And I put it together. I edited it. I still have the original with the blue ink, which has bleeded through the papers, and I've got all that back home that my dad had. And I went to the same printer that did that huge act for the first time, and we were so disappointed because we're trying to save money. And he says, I can do it. And he didn't really believe, born again and the gospel salvation the way we did. But he printed it so small, so tiny that we were so disappointed with that book that came out. They've been reprinted in larger print since then, but the first 500, a couple of hundred anyways, came out like this. And back here, I'm early in my 20s. eyesight was pretty good yet, but you look at that, that was. But it's because someone's going to take, Dad, you're gone, you're a pioneer in Rosa River there. The Lord called you from that family. He called you. And then he called your mother, you know, my grandmother, to be baptized, to become followers of Jesus Christ. And now he's gone. It spoke to my heart, and I said, you know, I can get a little bit more serious and listen. I just sense the Lord is calling me to learn more about Him. We sing the song "More About Jesus Would I Know," more of His grace throughout His show, and more about Jesus. I always had that hunger. I still have that hunger. You know?
Because that was a big thing to pull away from work and support, and I know the
Yes.
struggles I've gone through where God calls you, not when you're single, but when you're married, it is a difficult journey.
It's a difficult
You
journey.
got to
Yes.
provide journey.
And I'm so thankful for my wife standing behind me.
You need that support of your spouse.
Yes, yes.
There's financial issues, and you know you've got your retirement or pension or your job,
Yes.
and when God calls you, it is a struggle. And there are a lot of our pastors I know in our work that I've researched. Many of them did not have it easy on the home front.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very difficult days, especially financial and away
Yes.
from the children
Yes.
and big families, and then find work to do after school. And I can understand why so many of our pastors held on to their positions in all of our churches. If
What
they-
position you're talking as in ministry or in
Yes.
their secular job?
No, in the pastor.
Yes.
Because that was the only thing they were doing, and they lost that job.
Yes.
And they weren't having a secular job.
Yes.
How else would they find work in another Ukrainian church in the city? There was
Yes.
only one,
Yes.
and you had to move to another. So it was very difficult, and a lot of our pastors are hardly ever paid anywhere near what
Yes.
the English pastors were paid. So
Yes.
I just remember years and years. You've always
Yes,
said,
there
I
was-
signed up for 2 years,
Yes.
and I'm going to be
Yes,
here for 2
I
years.
I believe this is what the Lord called me to. Of all the different courses available, I looked at that and I said, yes. And I felt so comfortable there. And I said, hey, doesn't matter if it's fire or what kind of storms come my way. I believe the Lord wants me to finish this. In fact, we used to travel, my wife and I, with your brother Mike and Irene on long weekends. We used to go
To the
on
States?
trips to the States, to Nashville, and
Yes.
for weekends all over the place. And there were times when I would be sitting in the back seat as Mike is driving, and I'm still studying because there's exams to be written. You know, when we get back to Toronto, and I would be studying coming back from a trip like that. It's an experience, and I felt at peace that this is what. When I graduated, I'm full time back at Canada Metal Company,
So they're the
and
the secular work was there, and God
yes,
held that,
and he
held
held that
open for you.
Of all the years I've been there, no one was allowed to do, part-time work and still hang on to your seniority. Down the line, I became president of the union at the Canada Metal, which I held the position for over 12 years at the place until the place was sold to a movie company and closed in
Just
2006.
I'm just going to wrap up this portion, but for the audience to know, whoever is listening, just Jarvis Street Baptist Church and a few of my thoughts, but Walter probably knows this, but the man who pastored him, the pastor, Brother Kinda, who baptized him in Rosa River, was actually baptized at Jarvis Street Baptist Church on January 27, 1913. And I was just pulling that out of the book here, I remember coming across that, but I shared Saturday night, and on some other day you can watch that portion of my message on how God used John Kalishnikov to come to Toronto on his vacation for 1 week. And early in the morning on the streets of Toronto, at 10 o'clock at night, he came from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and he stood and he preached every day, and he made converts, and he came to the entire Quebec Convention and asked for help. They supported him, and one of his biggest fruits was Peter Kinda. And little did Walter know that back in 1912, when Peter accepted the Lord here in Toronto, that he would go to out west years later, and he got baptized right next door in the same place where you graduated.
Yes, right.
And if you graduated in 1975, 62 years later,
Yes.
there's a connection there at Jarvis Street Baptist Church. And
50 years after he was baptized. Was he baptized in 1913?
1913.
I was in 1963. 50 years later, he baptized me in the Rosa River.
Today is Sunday, January 27th, 2013. Today marks the 100th anniversary of Peter Kindred's baptism here at Jarvis Street Baptist Church, as you can see behind me. Over 100 years ago, John Kalishnikov came to the streets of Toronto and stood on the corners from morning to night on his vacation. And a couple of years after that, Peter Kindred saw a Russian-Ukrainian mission. Someone at this church gave $300 to pay for the mission halls, 2 of them for 1 year. Today, this morning, I went back to basically just say thank you. And Pastor Fry this morning read an email that I sent in during the week from the Ukrainian Baptist Heritage Center, and I had an opportunity to speak with him and others after the congregation. I just wanted to mark today's event, that in this day in history, 100 years ago, the significance of a baptism, of what it can do for our Ukrainian Baptist work. I want to end off this portion. I remember when I was a teenager and how God has impressed on me how life is short by reading this book in 1971. That I stood at the back in that same, it was the white building, the seminary, and they had a student give his testimony. And you wouldn't know this, maybe I've never shared it. I was a teenager at University of Toronto. God just had me pop in there because I know Walter.
At Jarvis Street?
Okay. In the school, there's the big lobby at the back. There's a table there, and there were students there, and a young blonde guy stood up. And we're going to transition to the next segment on how God takes a life early. And we don't have all of our years to serve Him. And I remember Walter Tymciw and others encouraging me, but the verse, remember the Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come. And how God used this church and Brother Walter and many others to impact me, knowing that this might be the last year of our life. And what impacted me is I was in university, and I popped in there just because I always love to go visit places where people that I know. Walter, this was 78, 79, so just 5 or 6 years after you graduated. I came in after a school night, I pop in there, and I'm listening to a blonde teenager who's enrolled at that school, and I've never forgotten that evening, how they had him share his testimony because he had cancer. And just a few months later, he died. And I was just in 1st or 2nd year university. And I'm asking myself, wow, here's a guy who's not even going to finish school. And your commitment of 2 years. Why is God taking that young person? And people who know me, I'm always rushing around. There's urgency. I'm always, I know time is short. And there have been years in my life where I know that I wasn't that active or involved. And I know when I sang with a group for many years, those were busy years. There was a few years of law, and then I've been celebrating a 25-year anniversary of going to a cell since 1984, and that's a story in itself on some other portion. But I remember those years where, why is God taking these young people? Why did God take Brother Tymciw in 1975, just a few years after that? And in my research, just the last few nights, I'm finding out that his nephew, Mark Osborne, in a book written about him, says that he accepted the Lord at John Wesley White Crusades just shortly after his uncle died. And I know God removes people for a reason. I did not get a chance to share this, but unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground, it remains alone, but it has to fall off the shelf. It has to fall off the top shelf in a barn. It's got to go into the ground. And I believe my only answer I can give to all those that are watching these interviews, that the only reason God removes people from our lives is to continually remind us that He is sovereign. He gives and He takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And that we do not have guaranteed retirement, pension plans, old age. Some of our parents do. My father-in-law is 92 years old, and my mother went at 72. Walter's father went in his 50s. Alex Osborne went in his late 40s. And God removes them for a reason, to get our attention, I believe. Not that He just needs a little angel like Johnny Zoo, his boy when he was not even 5 or 4, to get our attention in our families and our marriages. And if that doesn't do it, nothing will. I believe when God removes someone from our life, we act differently. And that's exactly what's happened with Dr. Kohut, passing on at 92. I regret not sitting down with him like this and just picking his incredibly brilliant brain, as his son talked about, and where Walter shared at the funeral as well. And Walter will share some other time about his recollections with Dr. Kohut and the first funeral that he served with Dr. Kohut, and we'll touch upon that in just a few minutes. But for those that are listening, if you've lost a loved one, it's difficult days, but I really believe one of the reasons why God removes a loved one is to remind us that life is short and needs to get our attention some way. And no parent deserves to bury their child. No parent deserves to bury 3 grandchildren, as Mrs. Tymciw has just done a couple of weeks ago. Burying someone who was stillborn under Andy, her son. Another son lost a daughter in a car accident here, and now just recently another grandson at 36, Robert Tesla, just died of cancer in the States. And yet her very husband stood on this platform for many years and passed on just a few years ago. But what grandparent deserves to bury 3 grandchildren? I remember when Alex Osborne passed on, both parents buried a son. And within 1 year, Dr. Kohut wrote the life story of Alex Osborne in November 1986. And then Mrs. Osipovich, or I believe Miss Osipovich, and Mrs. In 1 year, Dr. Kohut wrote the life stories of 3 family members. And how that felt for Araya, the daughter, and David, the son, bearing a brother and a father and a mother. Those were difficult days, and I know I had a chance to interview them at a cell, and I'll continue to interview with them so that they can be encouragement to us. But as we end off this portion, we're going to transition to the life of Peter Kutsenko and Walter's recollections of him, and the interview that Walter played, and why we're sitting here as well from this baptismal. Peter never got a chance to get baptized, but Walter honored him and God by playing Peter's testimony in his last days. And so we end off this portion here, and thank you, Walter, for sharing your time about your call at Bible College and school in Toronto and how God used that. And he calls people different ways into different schools and for different years. And that was a special time for me, going to Winnipeg, and a special time for you. So we wrap up this portion, and stay tuned as we just spend a little bit of time talking about Peter Kutsenko next. Thank you very much.
Thank you.